ballroom lights shimmered like melted gold across the marble floor, catching the curve of every champagne glass and the practiced smile of every guest who mattered. In the center of it all stood a man no one truly knew. He was introduced that night as Dr. Daniel Graves, surgeon, philanthropist, visionary. He shook hands with senators, whispered promises to investors, and carried himself with the quiet certainty of a man who had never failed. Cameras flashed, laughter rose, and somewhere beneath the orchestra's swell, he was already calculating his next escape. By morning the doctor would vanish, leaving behind a trail of forged checks, silenced partners, and a charity that existed only on paper. Yet the guests remembered him fondly. Gracious, intelligent, magnetic. Nobody thought to question how a celebrated surgeon could disappear overnight. Nobody imagined they'd been touched by a ghost. Months later, a file landed on Agent Sarah Collins's desk at FBI headquarters. A thick envelope stamped Operation Mirage. Inside were photographs. 8 different faces, 8 different names, all belonging to one man. Each image looked real, every identity perfectly layered. A pilot, a professor, a financial advisor, a priest. Sarah stared at the photos until the fluorescent light above her flickered and her own reflection ghosted over the glass. She whispered his alias aloud, testing the syllables like a curse. Daniel Graves. She had heard of him in rumors, an urban legend among investigators, a con artist so skilled he made others doubt reality itself. But this case felt personal before it even began. Sarah had spent the last year recovering from a failed sting that cost an undercover agent his life. She'd promised herself to stay detached this time, to treat it like data, not destiny. Still, something about those eyes, the calm arrogance, the faint half-smile, tugged at her. The Bureau's briefing was simple: locate, identify, apprehend. Yet every lead dissolved as soon as it appeared. Records showed Daniel owning property in Chicago, but the deeds were falsified. His fingerprints matched 3 different individuals, all deceased. Surveillance footage caught him boarding a flight to London. The passenger manifest listed him as a diplomat from a country that didn't exist. It was as if the world itself conspired to protect him. Sarah began reconstructing his path from fragments, small-town scams that escalated into multinational fraud. One victim, a retired teacher, told her, "He made me feel seen." Another whispered, "He looked at me like he'd known me forever." Each story was less about money and more about trust. Daniel studied people, mirrored their hopes, became what they needed most, then vanished before they realized what he'd taken. Late one night, Sarah sat in the archives room surrounded by case files and cold coffee. She pinned photographs to the wall. Victims, bank statements, emails, blurry CCTV stills. The pattern was beautiful in its cruelty. Every 3 months, Daniel reinvented himself. Every new persona began in chaos and ended in silence. She traced the lines with a pen, connecting cities like constellations until they formed the outline of a single human obsession: control. Outside, rain slicked the city windows. Inside, Sarah felt the strange thrill of chasing someone who understood perfection the way she did. Her partner, Agent Marcus Reed, leaned against the doorframe. "You've been at this for 14 hours, he said. "He's just another con man." She shook her head. "No, he's not stealing for money. He's rewriting himself." The next morning, an anonymous tip arrived. A man matching Daniel I.'s description had been seen entering a government building in New York under the name Alan Kerr, consulting on security contracts. Sarah and Marcus flew out, adrenaline masking exhaustion. The lobby security guards remembered him, polite, efficient, carrying credentials from the Department of Defense. Everything checked out. But something was wrong. When Sarah requested the digital entry logs, she discovered the footage for that day had been wiped. Only one frame remained. Daniel looking straight into the camera, expression unreadable, as if he knew she'd be the one watching. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She replayed the image until her laptop screen dimmed. Who was he really? A failed genius? A sociopath? Or something more terrifying? Someone ordinary who learned to wear extraordinary masks? The question unsettled her. If a person could fabricate every part of their identity, what remained of truth itself? 2 weeks later, an encrypted email arrived from an untraceable server. No message body, just an attachment labeled, "For Sarah." Against protocol, she opened it. A single photograph appeared. Her standing outside the bureau building, coffee in hand, taken that morning. Beneath it, a line of text. "You're getting warmer." Her pulse spiked. Marcus urged her to report it immediately, but she hesitated. Daniel had reached into the heart of the bureau and found her. She felt equal parts fear and exhilaration. For the first time since her failure, she felt alive in the hunt. Days blurred into nights. She combed through financial records, airline manifests, phone logs, the same shadowy figure resurfacing under new disguises. Each alias told a story, a man saving orphans in Cambodia, another consulting for tech startups in Silicon Valley. Yet the signatures, the syntax in his emails, the subtle patterns, all his. One evening, Sarah followed a trail to a derelict motel outside Chicago. Room 214 had been paid for in cash, no ID. Inside, the walls were covered with newspaper clippings about her. Articles on her past case, her commendations, even a photo of her late partner. On the desk sat a recorder. She pressed play. A calm voice filled the room. "You think you're chasing me, Sarah? But maybe I chose you. Maybe I needed someone who could see me." Her throat tightened. She looked around the room, empty except for the echo of her own breathing. She wanted to scream, to call for backup, but instead she listened to every word until the tape ended with a quiet chuckle and a click. Back at headquarters, she spread the evidence across the table. Daniel wasn't just evading capture. He was crafting a relationship, a psychological duel. He wanted recognition. He wanted to be understood. As dawn broke, the city outside turned pale blue. Sarah stood by the window, exhausted yet unwilling to leave. Behind her, the wall of faces watched silently. Different names, same eyes. Somewhere out there, Daniel was already someone new, living another lie with effortless grace. She promised herself she'd find him, no matter what it cost. And as the first light touched her desk, a courier delivered an envelope with no return address. Inside, a single playing card, the Joker, and a handwritten note. "Your move." Sarah smiled, though she didn't know why. Maybe this was what she'd been waiting for all along, a game worthy of her. The next morning, the Joker card lay under a pool of sunlight on Sarah's desk, its smile cutting through the gray of the office. She hadn't slept. Her fingers traced the edges of the card until the colors blurred. Daniel's taunt was clear. He wasn't hiding. He was inviting her. By noon, she had a new wall of photographs pinned behind her. Red strings crossed over states, companies, victims. Every line she drew only revealed another question mark. Her partner Marcus entered carrying 2 coffees and a look of restrained worry. "You've been here all night again," he said. "You think he's watching you?" Sarah gave a thin smile. "He's always watching. That's his art form." They reviewed the motel evidence again. Nothing left behind. No fingerprints, no receipts. The recorder had no manufacturer label, its internal memory wiped except for that single message. Whoever Daniel really was, he knew technology, psychology, and the Bureau's own procedures better than most insiders. Sarah A.'s gut told her he studied their methods the way a chess player memorizes an opponent's favorite opening. She began retracing his financial movements. The fraud seemed random until she noticed the pattern. Every account Daniel touched linked back to a company dissolved within 90 days, all funneled through a small investment firm in Miami that didn't appear to exist. On paper, it was registered by a man named Peter Lang. The passport photo on file belonged to a dead journalist from Prague. Sarah booked a flight to Miami that afternoon. Marcus protested, but she was beyond waiting for authorization. "We're already chasing smoke," she told him. "Might as well breathe it firsthand." The heat in Florida was relentless. the air thick with salt and the smell of gasoline from boats drifting in the harbor. The address for the investment firm led to a 2-story building with tinted glass. Inside, everything was pristine. White desks, humming computers, and a receptionist who greeted her with corporate cheer. "Peter Lang?" Sarah asked, flashing her badge. The woman blinked. "Mr. Lang's traveling, Singapore conference, he'll be back next week." Sarah nodded slowly, scanning the wall behind the receptionist. There, framed among certificates, hung a photograph of Peter Lang shaking hands with the city's mayor. The same eyes, the same faint half-smile, Daniel Graves in another skin. That evening, she waited in a rental car across the street until the office lights went out. She broke in through the side entrance, careful not to trigger alarms. On the second floor, in Lang's private office, she found a laptop humming softly on standby. She connected a bureau drive to copy its contents, watching as file after file loaded, client lists, contracts, and, hidden deep in a folder labeled Mirage, dozens of personal profiles on FBI agents, including her own. Birthdays, family addresses, internal memos. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. A photo of her inside the office taken seconds earlier. Text followed. "I thought you trusted your instincts more than this." She spun around, gun raised. The office was empty, but she could hear faint laughter echoing from a hallway speaker. The building's surveillance system flickered to life on the computer screen, every camera feed now showing her face from different angles. She yanked the drive out and ran. Outside, under the sodium glow of the parking lot, she fought to steady her breathing. He'd been there watching, maybe still nearby. Miami wasn't his base. It was another illusion, a theater stage he'd built just for her. Back in D.C., the Bureau's cyber division combed through the drive. Half the files were encrypted beyond standard tools, protected by rotating ciphers that changed every 30 minutes. One analyst muttered, "Whoever built this system isn't a con artist. He's a damn engineer." Sarah stood silent, arms crossed, mind racing. Every new detail about Daniel pulled him further from the category of criminal and closer to something more dangerous. A visionary without a conscience. 3 nights later, she returned to her apartment after another 12-hour shift. The door wasn't locked. She froze, hand on her gun. Inside, everything looked untouched except for the kitchen table. A single envelope lay there, sealed with red wax. She tore it open. Inside was a Polaroid photo of her father, taken years before his death. On the back, Daniel's handwriting, "I prefer working with people who understand loss." Sarah's knees nearly gave out. Her father had been a detective, one of the best, lost to a case gone wrong. She had never spoken publicly about it. Daniel knew because he'd read her. Found the one fracture in her armor. She sat at the table until sunrise, staring at that photograph, caught between rage and grief. The next day, Marcus confronted her in the briefing room. "He's baiting you, Sarah. He wants you emotional. That's how he wins." She looked at him, eyes hollow. Maybe that's what it takes to understand him. He slammed his hand against the table. "You sound like him." Their words hung heavy between them. For a moment, she saw the fear in his expression, the same fear she felt growing inside herself. Determined to regain control, she began profiling Daniel from a psychological standpoint. Sarah sat in the interrogation room alone, the hum of the overhead lights filling the silence. Her reflection in the one-way glass looked tired, older, like someone who had forgotten how to rest. The director's words still echoed in her head. "You're compromised." Maybe they were right. Maybe Daniel had already won by turning her life into one of his stories. But even if she was falling apart, she couldn't stop. He was still out there, still writing new lies, and every instinct in her screamed that he was getting closer. She reopened the Miami data with an analyst willing to work off the record. Hidden inside one of the encrypted folders was a set of coded phone transcripts, short cryptic exchanges between Daniel and someone inside the bureau. At first, the voices were unrecognizable through the distortions, but after hours of cleaning the audio, a faint laugh surfaced. She froze. It was a laugh she knew. The gravelly tone of Agent Thomas Hale. Hale had been her mentor, the one who'd pulled her back from the edge after her last failed case. He'd been like a second father, a man who taught her that justice was about patience, not emotion. The thought that he might be the leak made her stomach twist. She replayed the clip again and again, hoping she was wrong. But there it was, his voice, giving Daniel classified intel. That night, she waited outside Hale's suburban home, rain running down the windshield of her car. Through the glowing windows, she could see him moving inside, his motions slow, calm, domestic. She thought about calling for backup, but she needed to hear it from him directly. When he finally opened the door to her knock, he didn't even look surprised. "I wondered how long it would take you," he said quietly. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and old paper. She laid the drive on his table. "Tell me it's not you," she said. Hale sighed, poured himself a drink and stared at the glass before answering. "He didn't threaten me, Sarah. He convinced me. Do you know what it is like to spend your life chasing people you will never understand? Daniel isn't the problem, he's the mirror. He's showing us the cracks in our system." Her hands clenched. "He's a criminal. He destroys lives." "And what do we do?" Hale countered. "We destroy them in the name of order. The Bureau lies every day to protect a version of truth that doesn't exist." Daniel just stopped pretending. For a moment she saw the exhaustion in him, the way guilt had carved its lines deeper than age ever could. But pity gave way to rage. "You sold us out," she said. "You sold me out." He looked away. "He said you'd understand." Sarah left before she could say anything else. The storm outside had grown into a downpour, thunder rolling like distant gunfire. She sat in her car, shaking, the betrayal clawing through her chest. The man she trusted most had handed her enemy the keys to her mind. Back at her apartment, she found her walls bare. The photographs, the strings, everything gone. On the table sat a small black box. Inside, her badge. She picked it up slowly. Etched on the back in neat handwriting were the words, "Every hunter becomes the hunted." She called Marcus, her voice trembling. He was here. Marcus arrived within minutes. "You can't keep doing this alone," he said. "We'll bring in a full task force." But she shook her head. "No, this is personal now." He tried to stop her, but she was already planning her next move. Daniel had turned her investigation into a labyrinth, one that led through her own memories and fears. The more she studied him, the more she saw herself reflected in his logic. Both of them driven by control, both unable to let go of a single unanswered question. Days blurred. Sleep came in fragments, food forgotten. She chased patterns in data, hearing his voice in every shadow. She began speaking to him in her head, rehearsing the confrontation she knew was coming. At night, she dreamed of rooms with mirrors that all showed different versions of her. The investigator, the victim, the liar. Then came the message that shattered what little balance remained. A live broadcast appeared on the Bureau's encrypted network. Daniel sitting in a dark room, his face half hidden. "Hello, Sarah," he said. "I think it's time we stopped pretending. You're not chasing me anymore. You're chasing yourself." Behind him, monitors flickered with her case files, photos of her, transcripts of her therapy sessions she'd thought were confidential. "You see, I never needed to break into the Bureau," he continued. "You invited me in the day you started thinking like me." She felt cold all over, the kind of cold that begins in the bones. The video ended with a timer, 7 days counting down on the screen. Marcus tried to track the source, but it was routed through dozens of proxy servers. "It's a game," he said. "No," she whispered. "It's a test." The Bureau suspended her that night. They called it operational fatigue. She called it betrayal number 2. She packed her files and walked out without looking back. The rain followed her all the way home, relentless, as if the sky itself refused to let her breathe. That evening, she returned to Hale's house. It was empty, stripped bare, as though he'd never lived there. Only one thing remained on the kitchen counter, A small envelope. The coordinates led Sarah to the outskirts of Washington, D.C., where the city lights thinned into silence. The address was an old estate, abandoned, ivy crawling over cracked stone, windows like hollow eyes staring into the night. The kind of place ghosts might live in. She parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, rain misting the air, her hand resting on the gun at her side. Every step felt rehearsed, as if Daniel had already written this scene for her. The gates were unlocked. Of course they were. Inside, the driveway curved toward the mansion's entrance where a faint light glowed behind the glass doors. Her pulse drummed, steady and sharp. She pushed the door open slowly. It creaked, echoing through the empty hall. The foyer smelled of dust and old wood. A single bulb flickered overhead, illuminating a grand staircase covered in torn carpet. On the wall, portraits of strangers stared down at her. Faces half-faded, eyes almost alive. Somewhere deeper inside, faint classical music played, the melody warped and distant. She followed the sound through a corridor until she reached a vast parlor lit by a chandelier missing half its crystals. In the center stood a table set for two, candles burning low. A bottle of red wine, 2 glasses, and beside one glass, a familiar playing card, the Joker. "Welcome, Sarah." The voice came from the shadows near the piano. He stepped forward slowly, composed, almost elegant. Daniel Graves. Older than the last photo she'd seen, his face lined with time, but the same controlled smile played on his lips. "I was beginning to think you'd never come," he said. Sarah raised her gun. "Hands where I can see them." He didn't move. "If you were going to shoot me, you'd have done it the moment you saw me. You're here because you want answers." Her finger trembled on the trigger. "You think this is a game?" "I know it is," he said softly. "You made it one. Every move I made you mirrored. Every identity I built, you tore apart until you were building one of your own. Tell me, Sarah, who are you when you're not chasing me?" The question hit harder than a bullet. She hesitated, and he saw it. His smile widened, not with mockery, but with recognition. "You lost someone," he continued, circling the table. "Your partner. The case that went wrong. You've been trying to prove that wasn't your fault. You think catching me will give you peace, but it won't." "Shut up," she said through her teeth. Daniel stopped inches away, studying her. "You and I aren't enemies, Sarah. We're the same equation, different variables. I create illusions. You destroy them. We both lie for a living. Mine just look prettier." She exhaled shakily, the gun still aimed but her hands trembling. "You ruined people. You built lives just to break them." He tilted his head. "And you? You break people to save them. You think I don't read your reports? You manipulate witnesses, twist confessions, promise safety you can't guarantee. At least I don't pretend to be righteous." The truth stung. She hated how calm he was, how every word burrowed beneath her defenses. But she couldn't deny the pull, the sense that in some twisted way, he understood her better than anyone else ever had. Daniel poured wine into both glasses and gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit. For once, no lies, just truth." She didn't move. "You really believe you can talk your way out of this?" He smiled faintly. "No. I just want to see what you will do when you realize the ending isn't yours to write." Before she could respond, a faint click echoed from behind her. The lights dimmed, and a projector whirred to life on the far wall. Footage began playing. Grainy clips from her investigation, her apartment, her car, even her moments alone in the Bureau's archive room. Every second of her past months had been recorded. Her stomach dropped. "You've been watching me?" "Not just watching," he said. "Studying. I wanted to know the moment you to stop being the hunter and start being the story." She turned and fired once, shattering the projector. Sparks flared, plunging the room into darkness. When the smoke cleared, Daniel was gone. "Damn it," she hissed, spinning toward the corridor. The music had stopped. Silence pressed in from every direction. She moved cautiously, flashlight cutting through the dark. Upstairs, a door creaked. She followed the sound. heart pounding. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before her, lined with mirrors. Her own reflection stared back a dozen times over, fractured, ghost-like. At the end of the hall, a single door stood ajar, light spilling out. She pushed it open with her gun ready. The room was filled with files, maps, and photographs, an entire operation centered on her. Every wall was covered in her life story, childhood photos, academy records, psychological evaluations. In the center of the desk sat a folder labeled Agent S. Collins, Predicted Behavior. She flipped it open. Inside were detailed notes describing her every action from the past month, each one predicted before it happened. Even tonight. Written at the bottom of the final page were 4 chilling words. She comes to kill me. She heard movement behind her. Daniel stepped into the doorway, unarmed, calm as ever. "I told you this was a game," he said quietly, "but not one you could win." Her voice broke. "Why me?" "Because you see the world the way I do," he answered. "Because I wanted to know if someone like you would catch me or become me." She aimed her gun at him again, but something inside her faltered. All the anger, all the grief. It wasn't clarity anymore, just exhaustion. He looked almost sad as he took a step closer. "End it," he whispered. "That's what you came for, isn't it? To prove you still control something." For a moment she thought she might. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she saw her reflection in the mirror behind him, pale, hollow-eyed, trembling. She couldn't tell anymore who the villain was. Suddenly, Daniel's expression shifted. He glanced past her shoulder, eyes narrowing. A red dot appeared on his chest. Before Sarah could react, a shot rang out, shattering the silence. Daniel collapsed to the floor, blood blooming across his shirt. Sarah spun around. Marcus stood in the doorway, gun smoking, eyes wide with shock and relief. "He was reaching," Marcus said, voice shaking. She dropped to her knees beside Daniel, pressing her hand against the wound. He coughed, smiling faintly through the pain. "I told you. You'd never catch me," he whispered. Then, softer. "Maybe that's the point." His eyes went still. Sarah sat frozen, blood staining her hands, the sound of sirens rising in the distance. Marcus knelt beside her, saying something she didn't hear. Her gaze drifted to the folder on the desk. The final page fluttered open in the breeze from the broken window. Below the last line, Daniel had written one final sentence. "If I die, the game continues." Outside, flashing lights painted the mansion red and blue. Officers poured in, voices overlapping, footsteps echoing. But all Sarah could hear was Daniel's final whisper, replaying like an echo she couldn't silence. She stood slowly, numb, staring out into the night. Somewhere, far beyond those lights, she imagined him walking away. Another identity. Rain fell like ash the night they closed Daniel Graves's case. The FBI headquarters buzzed with the kind of quiet relief that follows a long hunt. Relief built on exhaustion, not victory. Agents shook hands, reports were filed, and someone opened a bottle of champagne in the corner. Sarah Collins stood apart from it all, her face half lit by the glow of the hallway lights. To everyone else, the nightmare was over. To her, it felt like it had only just begun. Daniel was dead. His blood had dried on her hands. The photos were already being processed, the statements typed and signed. Yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw that faint smile, the whisper that wasn't fear but certainty. "If I die, the game continues." For days, Sarah didn't sleep. Her desk was buried under files she'd already read 100 times, trying to find meaning in patterns that weren't there. Marcus visited once, told her she needed rest, told her she'd done her job. But she didn't feel like she had. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, that Daniel hadn't lost, only shifted the board. 3 nights after the raid, she received a package. No return address. Just her name, written in looping, elegant handwriting. The kind that belonged to someone who never rushed a single word. Inside was a small black USB drive and a single photograph. The photo was of her, standing at the cemetery where her old partner was buried. It had been taken weeks before Daniel's death. The angle, the clarity. It wasn't from a distance. Whoever took it had been close. Her breath caught as she slid the USB into her laptop. The screen flickered and a video began to play. The camera showed a dimly lit room, the same mansion where Daniel had died. He sat at the piano, wine glass in hand, wearing that same faint smile. The timestamp was dated 2 days after the raid. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his tone casual, almost warm. "If you're seeing this, I suppose I've kept my promise. I told you the game would continue." He leaned closer to the lens, his eyes sharp and alive. "You think I'm dead. You need to. That's how this works. But tell me, if a man spends his life becoming someone else, what does it mean to die? A name disappears, that's all. The rest of him evolves." Sarah's pulse hammered. She paused the video, rewound it, examined the frame. No blood, no sign of injury. He was alive when this was filmed, or someone wanted her to think he was. She hit play again. "I've been preparing this for a long time," he continued. "You thought I was improvising. I never improvise. Every lie I told was true to someone. Every mask I wore became real. And now I'm wearing my favorite one." He smiled. "Yours." The screen went black. Then a new clip played. A silent CCTV recording from inside the FBI building. The footage showed Sarah herself, walking through the lobby, swiping her badge, entering restricted areas. But the date on the footage was from the same time she'd been at home that night, asleep. She stared at the screen, cold sweat dripping down her spine. Someone had been impersonating her, someone with access, clearance, and her movements memorized. Her phone buzzed. A new message, no number, just text. "Nice to see you again, Agent Collins." She dropped the phone, heart racing. The lights in her apartment flickered once, twice. Then everything went dark. The power returned a moment later, but the laptop screen now showed something new. Her own face, live, captured from her webcam. Words began typing automatically across the screen. "You've learned to see through lies, Sarah. But have you ever questioned your own?" The message stopped. Silence filled the room, broken only by the low hum of her computer fan. She sat perfectly still, afraid that even breathing might give something away. Then another message appeared. "Check your reflection." She turned toward the mirror beside her desk. On the glass, written in faint red marker, were the same 4 words she'd seen before. "If I die, the game continues." Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "Look outside." She crossed to the window and peered down into the street. A man in a black coat stood by a lamppost, face hidden beneath an umbrella. He didn't move, didn't look up. After a few seconds, a black car pulled up beside him. He got in, and the car drove off into the night. The next morning, Sarah requested access to the building's security logs. No trace of a visitor, no black car registered. The camera feed from her street had been wiped clean at precisely 2:37 a.m. She tried to track the USB's metadata, but it rerouted through encrypted servers bouncing across 5 countries. Daniel's digital signature was everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus came to see her again. "You're chasing a ghost," he said gently. She looked at him with hollow eyes. "That's the point, isn't it?" He sighed, frustration breaking through his calm. "You need to let this go. You did your job, he's gone." But she didn't answer. Because in her mind, she could still hear that voice, the soft, deliberate rhythm of his words. "You can't kill an idea, Sarah. You can only feed it." Days blurred into weeks. The bureau cleared her for time off, but she refused to leave. Every night she stayed in the office long after everyone else had gone, rewatching footage, tracing lines on the map she'd pinned to her wall. And every time she reached what she thought was an end, a new thread appeared, leading somewhere else. Then one afternoon a file appeared in her inbox. No sender, no description. Just a single document titled Operation Ghost. Inside was a series of transactions, shell companies and offshore accounts, all opened under a name she recognized, Sarah Graves. She stared at it, heart frozen. It wasn't a mistake. The birth date matched hers. The photo ID attached looked exactly like her, only older, colder, wearing the same confident smile Daniel used to wear. The final line of the document read, "Primary objective, continue the legacy." The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. She deleted the file, but the words burned into her memory. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. She rose from her desk and walked to the window again. Across the street, a man stood under a streetlight, face hidden beneath an umbrella. Just like before. Only this time he wasn't watching her. He was waiting. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she turned off the lights, closed her laptop, and walked toward the door. Her reflection in the dark glass smiled faintly, half hers, half his. Somewhere in the distance, a piano began to play the same haunting melody she'd heard that night in the mansion. And as the scene faded into darkness, only one thought remained in her mind, quiet and electric. Maybe Daniel was right. Some ghosts never die. They just find a new face to wear.